4:12 a.m., northern Indiana. The cold had locked the town in place, not just freezing the streets, but preserving the illusion that nothing bad ever happened here. Steam crawled out of sewer grates and flattened itself against the curbs. Streetlights hummed with that thin electrical whine you only hear when the rest of the world has stopped moving. In the parking lot of a 24-hour big box store sat vehicles that didn't belong. No rust, no decals, no local plates. Black, clean, quiet. Too careful for this part of town. At 4:13, doors opened. People stepped out wearing gloves that didn't reflect light. No chatter, no jokes. They checked straps, adjusted shoulders, tapped a wrist twice, and moved. This wasn't a patrol. It was a switch being flipped. At the exact same minute, hundreds of miles away, identical clocks hit zero across the Midwest. Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, Michigan, Ohio, urban streets, rural roads, industrial zones, quiet neighborhoods, hundreds of targets, synchronized to the second. No sirens, no announcements. The order was simple: move, seal, hold. This wasn't about arrests yet. It was about control. A column of unmarked SUVs rolled through an empty intersection without headlights, carried forward by momentum alone. Inside were mixed teams, FBI and ICE, blended deliberately so no one unit owned the whole picture. 2 miles back, hidden behind a faded sign advertising HVAC repair, a mobile command truck came alive. That was where the real damage would happen. Doors could be forced anywhere. Systems took precision. The building they approached didn't look like a threat. Midwest Workforce Solutions, a job placement center, English classes, resume help, assistance with documents, the kind of place people trust without thinking about it. Posters in the windows showed smiling faces and slogans about second chances. Inside, a reception desk, coffee cups, stacks of brochures. On paper, it was clean. Grants, subcontracts, community partnerships. The city council had posed for photos here more than once. The local paper called it a pillar of recovery. At 4:15, the first team bypassed the front entrance and moved toward the loading area. Thermal cameras were already showing shapes inside, several on the main level and something denser below, in a space that didn't exist on any filed blueprint. The team lead raised a hand. Everything stopped. Then it started. The lock wasn't broken. It was persuaded. The door opened just enough to slip a narrow beam of light through the gap. The smell inside was wrong. Cleaning chemicals layered over something sharper, drier. The warehouse was stacked with boxes labeled educational supplies, medical kits, donations. Everything looked charitable, but some boxes carried additional markings, small symbols, color dots, shorthand that meant nothing to volunteers and everything to people who move inventory. At 4:17, they found the door that shouldn't have been there. Not an emergency exit, not storage. A steel panel painted to match the wall, its handle disguised as part of the frame. Beside it, a scanner hidden behind plastic. This wasn't a feature you install in a job center. The cyber tech didn't ask for time. He connected. 20 seconds, 30. At 4:18, the panel slid aside and exposed a narrow corridor dropping downward. The air changed instantly. Warm and dry became cold and wet. Ventilation hummed too steadily, like it was working overtime to erase something it couldn't fully hide. The stairs ended fast. And that's where the agents slowed, not because of violence, but because of order. Rows of metal bunks, aligned with military precision. Beneath each one, a plastic bin holding personal items. Cheap toothbrushes, hair ties, scraps of paper with names written in different hands, notebooks filled with languages that didn't belong together. This wasn't shelter, it was storage. Along one wall hung tags, not ID badges. Tags with numbers, dates, and a single word stamped beside them. Transfer. The next room was quieter. People sat pressed against the wall, young, exhausted, trying to make themselves small. Some stared without blinking. Others looked away, already trained not to meet eyes. Paramedics moved in without waiting, blankets and water appearing as if from muscle memory, shallow pulses, dry lips. Someone started talking too fast, afraid the moment might close again. By 4:21, A third space explained how this place survived. Packaging tables, press molds, unlabeled tablets sealed like consumer goods, powder packed with industrial efficiency, cash stacked and banded, marked by color, treated like cargo instead of money. But the room that froze everyone came last. At 4:23, in a refrigerated chamber lined with server racks, one monitor was still active. It displayed a map, not of a city, but of the Midwest itself. Lines ran between nodes, corridors traced highways and rail spurs. Each route was color-coded, one color for product, another for people. At the top of the screen sat an access key and a name. It wasn't a cartel alias, it wasn't a street name. It was a name from inside the system, one of the people who approves, certifies, and signs off. And in that moment, standing beneath a building everyone trusted, it became clear why hundreds of raids had begun at once. This wasn't a mistake being corrected. It was a machine being unplugged, because someone had spent years making sure it ran perfectly. 8:46 a.m., Chicago field office. The servers arrived in sealed evidence cases still cold from the rooms they'd been pulled out of. No one joked about coffee. No one asked how long it would take. The lights in the cyber bay were already dimmed, screens waking up in sequence like a city at dawn. This phase didn't kick doors, it listened. By 9:02, drives were cloned. By 9:11, hashes matched. By 9:19, the room got quieter than it had been all morning. Not because something failed, because too much worked. The data didn't look criminal at first glance. No skull icons, no sloppy encryption. Just folders named after vendors, schedules, compliance reports, transport invoices. The kind of digital paperwork that passes audits because it anticipates them. Each node used a different logo, a different mission statement, a different public face. But the file trees were identical. Same cadence, same timestamps, same language buried in the metadata. Whoever built this wasn't improvising. They were replicating. A map rebuilt itself on a wall-sized display. Not the one agents had seen in the basement. This one was deeper. It showed clusters that mirrored one another across state lines. Job centers, clinics, nonprofits, warehouses, a franchise without a brand. Each site fed two streams, one physical, one financial. The physical moved through predictable corridors, interstates, rail spurs, transfer points chosen for one reason only. They sat just outside routine enforcement patterns. The financial moved cleaner, grants, service contracts, education funds, transportation reimbursements, money that arrived with signatures and left as line items. At 9:37, an analyst flagged the approvals. The same hand kept appearing, sometimes directly, sometimes through delegated authority. Waivers granted quickly, inspections postponed, exceptions logged as temporary and never revisited. This wasn't bribery. There were no deposits to point at, no pressure calls. The system didn't bend rules, it wrote them. Shortly after 10, feeds came in from the field. Milwaukee, Des Moines, Toledo, Duluth. Each team reported the same rhythm. Clean front, hidden layer, order below ground. In one city, a nutritional supplement facility turned out to be a tablet press running 3 shifts, workers believing they were packing vitamins. In another, a residential program for at-risk youth hit a locked wing with schedules taped to the wall, dates, destinations, initials. A catering warehouse in Ohio concealed a loading ramp that dipped just far enough to shield transfers from cameras mounted for forklifts, not people. By late morning, the picture stopped expanding outward and started collapsing inward. Accounts linked back to the same 17 intermediaries, each named to sound boring: logistics consultants, curriculum providers, fleet services, food contractors. None of them delivered anything measurable. All of them moved money on time. From there, it broke into layers: offshore clearinghouses, privacy coins, wallets rotated on a calendar. The kind of flow that assumes scrutiny and survives it. At 11:22, an engineer pulled a thread labeled Oversight. It shouldn't have existed. The folder contained mirrored calendars, scrape logs, alerts keyed to public records, inspection schedules, permit hearings, budget meetings. The network wasn't reacting to enforcement, it was watching it. When a visit appeared on a calendar, routes shifted. When auditors were assigned, inventory thinned. When a warrant was rumored, the system went quiet days in advance. Someone in the room finally said what everyone was thinking. This wasn't evasion. This was prediction. The name at the top of the chain appeared again and again and again. Not as a beneficiary, as an authorizer. Digital signatures on shipment approvals, on facility expansions, on compliance memos that closed loops before they opened. A career spent talking about safeguards, about protecting vulnerable populations, about standards and accountability. A record clean enough to teach from. The signature wasn't hiding. It was normal. By noon, it was clear the Midwest wasn't the whole story. References pointed outward. Replicas of the same framework in neighboring regions, marked pending or inactive, like a store waiting to open. The system wasn't built to last forever. It was built to scale. At 12:41 p.m., a message went out from command. Phase 2 would not be staggered. It would be simultaneous. The goal wasn't arrests, it was amputation. Cut the arteries at once and let the rest bleed out. Across the wall, nodes turned red as warrants cleared and teams repositioned. Air units were reassigned. Financial freezes queued, border partners alerted. The machine had learned how the government moved. Now the government was about to move all at once. Somewhere beneath a building, with a friendly sign and a donation box by the door, a process that had run smoothly for years finally encountered something it hadn't modeled. 5:30 a.m. Day 2. The wall inside the Chicago Command Center glowed red. Not alarms, markers, dozens of them at first, then more as feeds synced in. Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, Michigan, Ohio. Industrial parks, suburban office strips, rural properties nobody had questioned in years. Each marker represented a node already mapped, already mirrored, already understood. This wasn't discovery anymore. This was execution. The order went out without ceremony, no countdown, no speeches. Just a shift in posture across hundreds of teams at once. Highways were quietly narrowed, rail spurs locked down under the pretext of maintenance. Airspace tightened in corridors no one ever noticed unless they flew for a living. Banks received freeze notices keyed to accounts that looked harmless on their own and lethal when viewed together. On the ground, doors came apart almost simultaneously. In Wisconsin, a regional logistics hub opened to reveal a transfer floor still warm from use. Tire marks hadn't cooled. Clipboards lay where someone dropped them mid-step. A whiteboard listed times and columns, not destinations. Handoffs, not deliveries. In Iowa, a nonprofit office emptied of staff in under 2 minutes once the first warrant hit the system. But the basement didn't clear fast enough. They found binders sealed in plastic, each labeled by week, each containing travel documents that didn't belong to the names printed on them. Movement betrayed the network. As soon as the first seizures hit the wire, secondary routes lit up. Vans left early. Trucks altered schedules by minutes, not hours. Inventory shifted from one safe address to another that had passed inspections last quarter. That adjustment window, small, efficient, confident, was what teams were waiting for. Interdictions followed the motion, not the paperwork. Stops happened where patterns broke, where drivers hesitated, where routes bent just a little too sharply away from habit. In Ohio, a convoy never made it past the second exit. In Michigan, a warehouse supervisor tried to burn drives before realizing the building had already gone dark upstream. In Illinois, a residential property listed as transitional housing locked down, its manager insisting on procedure while people inside pounded on doors that didn't open from their side. By mid-morning, the finds stopped being surprising and started being heavy. Tags, schedules, medical intake forms stamped with dates that lined up across state lines. Lists that tracked people the way freight companies track pallets. No names in some cases, just weights. Ages, conditions, readiness. It wasn't chaos, it was administration. At 8:17, the first of the approvals chain was taken into custody. No attempt to flee, no raised voice. The individual was already dressed, already composed, already holding a phone that had gone useless minutes earlier when the network lost its mirrors. When confronted with the logs, there was no denial, just a pause, then silence. Attorneys were requested before the sentence finished. By noon, the tally crossed thresholds nobody had predicted out loud. Dozens detained, then more. Victims moved into care facilities set up overnight. Assets frozen faster than compliance departments could call back. Products seized by the ton. Cash counted until the numbers stopped meaning anything except scale. And still, the analysts weren't satisfied. Because buried in the recovered communications, beneath the routing tables and approval workflows, was something colder: internal assessments. Heat maps not of police presence, but of attention. The network had been grading jurisdictions the way insurers grade risk, where scrutiny was lax, where oversight was understaffed, where reputations carried more weight than audits. It had known where to expand long before it did. At 14:03, a final briefing cut through the room. The person at the top of the visible chain wasn't the origin. They were a gate, a valve, useful because they made the system feel legitimate. The true coordinator didn't sign forms, didn't appear on rosters, didn't need to. Their influence showed up only in design choices, in how the network breathed, how it shed skin, how it anticipated pressure before it arrived. By late afternoon, as the last warrants were served and the last convoys escorted, the map began to quiet. Red markers dimmed to gray, lines vanished, corridors collapsed. What remained wasn't victory, it was absence. A machine that had run smoothly for years had been forced to stop all at once. Not because it was overwhelmed, but because it had finally encountered a variable it couldn't route around. A government willing to move everywhere, at the same time, without warning. And somewhere beyond the Midwest, someone was already recalculating. The silence after the raids didn't feel like relief. It felt like vacuum. By the third morning, the Midwest woke up to buildings that still looked the same from the outside, but no longer functioned the way they had the day before. Offices were dark. Warehouses sat sealed with notices taped to glass. Phone numbers that had always been answered now rang into nothing. The machine had stopped, and the sudden absence of it was disorienting. Emergency hearings stacked up before transcripts from the operation were even finished. State agencies scrambled to explain how routine audits had missed underground floors, duplicate ledgers, mirrored calendars. Regulators used words like oversight gaps and process failures. But the people reading the summaries understood the truth immediately. This wasn't a blind spot. It was a feature. The system had been designed to be trusted. Inside temporary care centers set up across 3 states, survivors began the slow process of understanding where they were. Many had been moved so often they no longer knew which state they were in when they were taken. Names had been replaced by numbers, days by schedules. Some asked how long they'd been gone, others didn't ask anything at all. Doctors documented patterns that matched logistics charts recovered from servers, nutrition cycles, sedation intervals, transport readiness. Even recovery had to undo administration. Financial investigators kept digging and stopped using estimates. The numbers were already past what fit on briefing slides. Public funds rerouted through vendors that never delivered. Grants renewed automatically. Contracts extended because no one wanted to be responsible for shutting down a program with a good reputation. The money had traveled clean paths because it had started clean. That was the innovation. Not laundering dirty cash, but converting legitimacy itself into fuel. Within days, a new unit was quietly stood up inside federal agencies. Its mandate wasn't drugs or trafficking in isolation, but camouflage, schools, clinics, nonprofits, workforce centers. Any institution built on trust rather than scrutiny. The lesson had landed hard. The most effective cover isn't secrecy, it's credibility. The person whose name appeared at the top of so many approvals never spoke publicly. Neither did most of the others. Their silence wasn't defiance, it was habit. They had spent years operating inside rules, not outside them. In their minds, they hadn't broken the system. They had used it efficiently. But one question kept resurfacing in internal briefings, unanswered. Why now? The raids hadn't been triggered by a tip or a mistake. There was no panic withdrawal, no sloppy transaction. What finally exposed the network wasn't greed or violence. It was growth. The expansion plans, new regions, new nodes, new layers of insulation, had required one approval too many. One signature that crossed an internal threshold. One replication that finally made the pattern visible. The machine had scaled past the point where it could remain invisible. As weeks passed, analysts continued pulling threads, and in the deeper layers of recovered data, far below the dashboards and route maps, there were references that didn't resolve. Design notes written in a style that didn't match anyone in custody. Decisions explained not in operational terms, but structural ones. Notes about how trust was generated, how reputations were protected, how oversight could be redirected without resistance. The coordinator behind it all was never named, only described. Someone who understood not just crime, but institutions. Someone who didn't need to move product or people. Someone who designed environments where others did it for them. The Midwest operation was over. The damage was real. The rescues were real. The arrests were real. But the final assessment, buried deep in an after-action report, was colder than any headline. This wasn't a cartel problem. It wasn't a corruption problem. It was an architectural one. Because when a system can be turned into a weapon simply by following its rules, the danger isn't the people who abuse it. It's how long everyone else assumes it can't be abused at all.